What if helping one paralyzed girl meant walking away from a billionaire's offer of a lifetime? That's the choice Caleb, a small-town mechanic, had to make, and it would define everything. This is a story of courage, dreams, and staying true to your promise, even when the stakes couldn't be higher. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in choosing heart over profit, hit that subscribe button. More powerful stories are coming your way. Let's get started. In the misty valley town of Willow Creek, nestled between tall pines and winding back roads, lived a quiet mechanic named Caleb Thompson, in his early 40s. Caleb wasn't just known for fixing cars, he was known for putting heart into every bolt and engine he touched. His small auto shop, Thompson Motors, sat on the edge of town like a relic of a simpler time. The air always smelled of oil and metal, and the walls were lined with pictures of vintage cars he had restored over the years. Caleb wasn't rich, nor did he care to be. What mattered most to him was using his skill as a mechanic to help others. For him, every car he worked on was more than just metal and wires. It was a story waiting to be continued. That was why. When a paralyzed girl named Layla Monroe rolled into his shop one foggy morning, something in Caleb stirred. Layla, 24, had lost the use of her legs in a tragic accident, but not her spirit. She had a dream to drive again. And Caleb, without hesitation, made her a promise he would build her a car she could drive herself. A promise that would test his limits and eventually draw the attention of a billionaire. The day Caleb made that promise to Layla wasn't just another Tuesday. It was the beginning of something far greater than either of them could imagine. From the moment he saw her eyes light up at the thought of driving again, Caleb knew he wasn't just building a car, he was reigniting a dream. Every evening after closing the garage, the humble mechanic stayed behind, sketching blueprints and researching hand-controlled driving systems. The challenge was immense. Adapting a vehicle for a paralyzed girl wasn't a job for amateurs. But Caleb wasn't just any mechanic. He poured everything he had into it: time, money, even sleep. He wasn't just building a machine, he was crafting freedom. Layla visited often, her presence becoming a bright spot in Caleb's long days. They talked about the wind in her hair, about open highways, and what it would feel like to be in control again. The car became more than a project, it became a shared vision. A bond forged in courage and commitment. But word began to spread someone in town had heard about the mechanic who was building a car from scratch for a paralyzed girl. It wasn't long before the story reached far beyond Willow Creek. One morning, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside Caleb's modest shop. The man who stepped out wore an expensive suit, polished shoes, and confidence that dripped from every word he spoke. He introduced himself as Preston Hale, a billionaire automotive magnate known for buying up innovation and turning it into gold. "I've heard about what you're doing here," Preston said, stepping inside, eyeing the half-finished car in the corner. "And I think we can take this further. Imagine mass-producing a line of vehicles for people like Layla. You build, I fund. Together, we change lives." It sounded noble. It sounded exciting. But beneath the surface of the billionaire's offer, Caleb sensed something else, a hunger for ownership, not partnership. Hale didn't mention Layla by name, nor did he ask why this promise mattered so much to Caleb. It wasn't about a girl's dream to him, it was about potential markets and untapped profits. That night, Caleb sat alone in his garage. The car shell gleamed under the shop lights, and Layla's smile echoed in his memory. He remembered her saying, "It's not just about driving. It's about freedom, about proving that I'm not broken." He knew then the choice ahead wouldn't just shape her future, it would shape his too. Just as the final screws were being tightened and the dashboard lit up for the first time, It happened. Caleb was under the hood of the modified car, adjusting the wiring of the hand control throttle, when a white envelope was slid under his garage door. At first, he didn't notice it, but once he opened it, his hand so steady and strong as a seasoned mechanic trembled slightly. It was a formal offer. Preston Hale, the billionaire, wasn't just interested in partnership anymore. He wanted full rights to the design. The letter stated that Caleb would be handsomely compensated, with a position at Hale Motors, stock options, and access to cutting-edge technology. All he had to do was walk away from the personal build for Layla. The car he promised to deliver to one paralyzed girl in a small town would become a prototype for a global market, and she would have to wait. Indefinitely. That night, Layla showed up at the shop unannounced. She was all smiles, her hope glowing brighter than the fluorescent lights inside. "I heard it's almost done," she said, her fingers running along the smooth door frame. Caleb forced a smile. His heart ached. He hadn't told her about the billionaire's ultimatum yet. He couldn't. "Just a few more tweaks," he said, were avoiding her gaze. "Then it's yours, like I promised." But as he watched her wheel herself around the car, her eyes shining with dreams, a knot formed in his chest. He'd built this vehicle with her in mind, not for money, not for fame, but for one purpose: to give her back her freedom. Days passed. Preston's legal team kept calling, emails pouring in with contracts and deadlines. Caleb started losing sleep, torn between his values and a future paved in gold. Was it wrong to want more? Was he selfish for considering it? Or worse, was he betraying Layla? The breaking point came when Preston himself arrived at the garage again, this time unannounced, this time with papers in hand and 2 corporate suits in tow. "Think about it," he said, placing the documents on Caleb's workbench. "You can help thousands of paralyzed people, not just one girl. This is bigger than her, Caleb. This is legacy." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. Layla had arrived early that day and was sitting quietly in the corner, unnoticed until she rolled forward. "You want to change the world?" she asked, looking straight at the billionaire. "Then start by keeping your promises. Don't take mine away to sell it." The room went still. Preston's smile faded. Caleb stepped forward, standing between them. His voice was low, firm. This car was never about business. It was about a dream. Her dream. And I'm not selling that. The billionaire stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out without a word. The garage door closed. Silence settled. And Caleb finally exhaled because he knew who he was, and more importantly, who he wasn't. In the days following that confrontation, Caleb's garage felt quieter. Not empty, just different. As a mechanic, he'd always loved the hum of engines, the metallic clicks of tools, the scent of grease in the air. But now, every sound carried a deeper meaning. Every turn of a wrench reminded him of the promise he'd made, not to a corporation, but to a paralyzed girl whose hope had reignited his purpose. He watched Layla more closely now, not with pity, but admiration. Despite everything she'd endured, she radiated strength. Caleb realized that building this car wasn't just about giving her freedom. It was about giving her her voice back in a world that too often spoke over her. But what haunted him most was the billionaire's offer, still lingering like a shadow over his shoulder. It had revealed something uncomfortable for a moment. He had considered it, not because he wanted fame or wealth, but because he had convinced himself that scaling his idea could help more people. But Layla's words that day had pierced through the fog. "You don't change the world by selling dreams. You change it by protecting them." That one sentence shifted everything. Caleb saw now that the temptation wasn't just about the money, it was the illusion that you had to go big to make a difference. But what if the most powerful thing you could do was help just one person fully, honestly, and selflessly. Layla began participating more in the build. She'd sit beside him for hours, giving feedback, helping select finishes, even suggesting design tweaks based on her mobility needs. The car evolved not into a mass-market prototype, but into something uniquely hers. Custom-built, purpose-driven. Caleb found himself talking less about what could be and more about what mattered now. He didn't care if a billionaire thought he was wasting potential. He was finally seeing that staying small didn't mean thinking small. It meant staying focused, staying human. One afternoon, as the final tests approached, Caleb handed Layla the keys, not as a symbolic gesture, but the real thing. "This is yours," he said quietly. "I built it for you." That was always the plan. Layla gripped the keys tightly, tears welling. "You didn't just build me a car, Caleb. You gave me my life back." That night, as Caleb sat outside the garage, watching the stars peek through the clouds, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. He hadn't taken the deal. He hadn't sold out. And yet, in that moment, he felt more successful than any corporate title could ever make him feel. Because he had chosen right. Because he had kept his promise. Because he had helped someone dream again. The sun was barely up when Layla took her first solo ride down the winding road that hugged Willow Creek. Caleb stood by the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, eyes tracking the silver car as it glided along the pavement. A smile crept across his face. The paralyzed girl he'd once met as a stranger was now chasing her dream. In a car he had built with his own hands, news of Layla's drive spread through town like wildfire. People gathered at the local diner, whispering about the mechanic who kept his promise, and the young woman who now moved freely again. Local reporters stopped by for interviews. And then, out of nowhere, the opportunity Caleb least expected came knocking again. But this time, it wasn't from a billionaire. A nonprofit organization based in Denver called Drive Forward reached out. They had seen the viral video of Layla driving. What struck them wasn't just the engineering marvel, but the emotion behind it. "We don't want to buy your design," their director told Caleb. "We want to partner. We want you to teach us how to build more cars like this for people like Layla with their own unique stories." Caleb was stunned. This wasn't about ownership or market shares. It was about impact. They offered to fund a small workshop in Willow Creek, where Caleb could continue working as a mechanic, mentoring apprentices, and helping paralyzed individuals regain their freedom through custom-designed vehicles. Layla was the first to hear the news. She rolled into the garage that afternoon, catching Caleb mid-sentence on the phone. When he hung up, he turned to her, almost breathless. "They want us to show others how to do this. Not just me, us. You'd help consult on design, functionality, user needs." Her face lit up like the morning sky. "You mean, I get to help other people dream again?" He nodded. "You already did." In the following weeks, the garage transformed. What was once a solitary space for a quiet mechanic became a lively hub of innovation. Engineers, therapists, and clients came through the doors, each one carrying their own story, their own struggle, and their own dream. Layla sat in on every session, giving feedback, sharing her experience, and watching as others felt the spark she had once nearly lost. Caleb had traded a flashy career for something far more meaningful. He wasn't just building cars anymore. He was building bridges between limitation and possibility. As word spread even further, interviews poured in not from billionaires looking to invest, but from families desperate for hope. They weren't asking for mass production, they were asking for miracles. And Caleb, with Layla beside him, was ready to deliver. The promise he had made to one girl had evolved into a movement, a ripple of change born from a humble garage, and a belief that sometimes the greatest revolutions start with a single act of compassion. Months passed, and Willow Creek became more than just a town with a brilliant mechanic. It became a symbol of possibility. Caleb Thompson, once content with solitude and wrenches, had evolved into a mentor, an innovator, and most importantly, a man who had redefined what it meant to keep a promise. He still wore the same oil-stained coveralls and drove the same rusted pickup, but inside, Caleb had changed. Where there had once been quiet contentment, there was now a burning purpose. Building that first car for Layla had been about one girl's dream, but now he was seeing how that act of compassion could ripple out, changing lives far beyond Willow Creek. Layla had grown, too. No longer just the paralyzed girl who rolled into a garage on a cloudy morning, she had become a leader in her own right. She co-led workshops with Caleb, advocating for accessible design, speaking at conferences, and even helping develop a community driving program. Her voice, once soft and unsure, now rang with conviction and clarity. Together, they had built more than cars. They had built a community. Caleb often thought about the billionaire, about how different things might have been if he had taken that offer. There would have been wealth, recognition, maybe even luxury. But none of it would have felt like this. This was raw, real, and rooted in love. Not just for machines, but for people. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the garage windows gold, Caleb sat alone, staring at the first sketches of Layla's car. He remembered how impossible it had seemed back then. The doubts, the pressure, the temptation to walk away. But he had held on tight to one thing, the belief that a dream is sacred, especially when it belongs to someone who's lost so much. That belief had become his compass. It guided him as he helped a teenage boy drive again after a spinal injury. It gave him strength when a mother in a wheelchair traveled states away to beg for a chance to feel independent again. And every time someone rolled out of the garage in a car custom-built for them, Caleb felt it all over again, the same fire he'd felt the day he met Layla. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a builder of futures, a protector of freedom, a keeper of promises. And though there would always be billionaires with big offers and shiny dreams, Caleb had found something better, something lasting, a legacy not defined by profit, but by lives touched and dignity restored. And it all started with one girl, one dream, and one mechanic who dared to say yes. Years later, Willow Creek had changed, but not in the way most small towns do. It hadn't grown taller with glass buildings or louder with traffic. It had grown deeper, fuller, richer with purpose. And right in the heart of it stood Thompson Motors. Now more than just a garage, it was a place of transformation, where one mechanic's conviction had become a movement. Visitors came from all across the country to see the place where it all began. They didn't come to gawk at fancy tech or flashy prototypes. They came to witness where hope was built, where a car, crafted with care and compassion, gave a paralyzed girl the strength to live again. Layla was now a co-founder of a nonprofit that partnered with rehab centers across the U.S. She often told her story about the day she rolled into a dusty old shop and met a quiet mechanic who made a promise. A promise not just to build her a car, but to believe in her when the world had stopped seeing her. Caleb remained the same in many ways, humble, steady, sleeves rolled up, grease under his nails. But there was a fire in him now, a light that came from knowing he had done what most men are too afraid to do, choose heart over fortune. He had walked away from the billionaire and his golden offer. And every time someone asked him if he regretted it, his answer was the same. Not for a second. Because every story he helped write, every man, woman, or child who drove out of his garage with tears in their eyes was worth more than 100 boardrooms full of billionaires. The media often tried to paint Caleb as a hero. He always declined interviews. "This isn't about me," he would say. "It's about what happens when you keep your promises, when you choose people over profit, when you build something that matters." He kept a small photo on his workbench. Layla, the day she first drove her car, her smile wide, one hand on the steering wheel, the other waving through the open window. To Caleb, it wasn't just a photo, it was the finish line and the starting point. All at once, he had taken his craft as a mechanic and turned it into a form of resistance, resisting the easy path, the lucrative path, and instead forging one that honored dignity, freedom, and dreams. And the best part, it never stopped with Layla. Because one car led to another, one story led to dozens more. A chain reaction of possibility, lit by a man with a toolbox and a heart full of fire. That's how revolutions begin, not with noise, not with money, but with one person who says yes to doing the right thing. Caleb's journey reminds us that true success isn't measured by wealth, recognition, or the endorsement of a billionaire. It's defined by the promises we keep and the impact we leave behind when we choose empathy over ego. A mechanic, a paralyzed girl, and a car on paper. It sounds simple, but in reality, it was a life-altering decision to build something not for profit, but for purpose. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is help one person. That's how change begins, with a single act of courage, fueled by compassion, inspired by Caleb's story sometimes. The hardest road is the most meaningful one. When you stay true to your promise, you build more than just a car, you build hope. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more uplifting content, and comment below. Would you walk away from everything to stand by someone's dream? We want to hear your take.